The Salem City Council Committee on Administration and Finance, co-posted with the Committee of the Whole, is meeting in council chambers today, Wednesday, May 31st at 6 p.m. for the purpose of discussing operating budgets for departments in the fiscal year 2024 and any associated capital improvement projects. This meeting is being held primarily in the City Council chambers at 93 Washington Street on the second floor. Individuals may also listen or view the meeting via a remote platform called Zoom by using webinar ID 878-6302-7327, password 636125. But the primary meeting is here. And currently present from the Committee on Administration and Finance are all members except Councilor Watson-Felt. Also joining us from the Committee of the Whole is Councilor Prosnewski and Councilor Cohen. We do have some changes to our agenda tonight. We have had to postpone our discussion with the engineering and public services departments. They were unable to join us tonight. That has been rescheduled to next Tuesday, the 6th. So anybody who was tuning in for that should join us next Tuesday, the 6th at 6 p.m. Engineering and public services will become a part of that meeting at that time. We are still going to discuss the operating budget for the Salem school system tonight. However, we are going to take a recess in advance of that since our superintendent is currently attending one of our school's graduations and was not anticipating having to be first on the agenda tonight. So we are going to take a 1-hour recess until 7:06 p.m., which is exactly 1 hour from now. And at that time, hopefully we will be joined by our superintendent and we'll proceed in discussing the budget for the school. So I will hear a motion from anybody to initiate that recess. Councilor Hapworth.
So moved.
Motion that we take a 1-hour recess from Councilor Hapworth. All those in favor? 3 hands plus my own. We are in recess until 7:06 p.m. Okay, 7:06 p.m. and we are returning from our recess. In the interim, we have been joined by more members of the council. Councilor Watson Felt from the committee has joined us, and also joining us are Councilors Morcillo and Dominguez. And we are also joined by our Superintendent of Schools, Dr. Schreich. Thank you for joining us, and you have the floor.
All right, good evening. Thank you for having us. I'm joined by our Assistant Superintendent for Operations and Finance, Elizabeth Pauley, who's going to share this presentation with me. I also want to just acknowledge that there are two school committee members beyond the mayor who are here. Our newest school committee member, Veronica Miranda, is here. Oh, sorry, and Mary Manning. Longtime school committee members here as well. I'd also point out that Ms. Manning is the chair of our finance subcommittee and has been instrumental in this process leading up to today. So just want to call out that they're here as well. So we're going to walk you through presentation that we gave to the school committee, some adjustments. I just want to also start by saying we very much appreciate the support of this council. We're excited about, I've been very pleased to have more interaction now that the world has opened up a lot more. And I look forward to the continued, dialogue between the council, the school committee, and the school district. I would love to come back at some point to do a state of the schools like we've done in prior years. Tonight isn't that presentation, but I would welcome the chance to do that in the future if you would allow that to happen. I'm just going to start by talking about, we have three core values that are instrumental in designing our, the work we do in the decision-making. And a budget is always an expression of values. And so our three core values are belonging, equity, and opportunity. And that's the lens through which we look at designing our budget on an annual basis. Next slide. Our vision in the Salem Public Schools has not changed over the last few years. We're interested in creating a culture of belonging that allows students to be locally engaged, globally connected, and fully prepared to thrive in a diverse and changing world. And I was very proud to come from the New Liberty graduation just before here, where we saw, it's one of the most joyous occasions, graduation, especially a place like New Liberty, where the path is not always a straight path, but our students get to the stage and they're ready for what's next to thrive in the diverse and changing world that they'll be entering into. Next slide. A few years ago, we developed an equity statement. This is at the core of our work in the school system. If you look in my offices, in the chambers, these statements are up in multiple languages. And this is, again, a filter in which we look at the decisions we make. We know we have systemic inequities that exist across the school system. Part of the history in institutions like schools, and we're working very hard to ensure that there's equity in the decisions we make and the way we use our resources. Next slide. Currently, we're finishing out a strategic plan, and we're in the process of redesigning our plan or redoing our plan, which will be shared with the school committee and the public in the advance of the upcoming school year. But we have four priorities right now. They're about developing our workforce, which is the core. Our talent is instrumental to our success. Academic excellence is our second priority, which is why we exist as an organization. And sometimes it's hard to remember that at the core, we're an academic institution. People are asking a lot about asking schools to do a lot right now, which we happily accept that responsibility. But at the core, we're an academic institution. Third is about the support systems that are so crucial, especially in this moment in time, around the well-being, the health, the well-being of our young people and our families. And then finally, it's about being efficient and strategic in the development and implementation of our systems. Next to each of those priorities are a series of initiatives that have driven our work over the last. This is my third year since I came 3 years ago, and like I said, we'll be issuing a new plan for the public to see sometime this summer. These are the outcomes that we hold ourselves accountable to. I think so we call this the North Star. We've hit home runs on some of them. Others we have been stuck. And others we've gone backwards. For instance, chronic absenteeism has been a very difficult metric to move over the last few years. With the pandemic, we've seen some real gains around access to pre-K, the percentage of educators and staff who represent the racial and linguistic and ethnic diversity of our students. We've seen some improvement in our dropout rate over that time. And so, these are the things that I would report out on when we do a state of the schools. Next slide. So the budget priorities for this upcoming school year, again, we start with this idea of allocating resources equitably. We want to make sure that the decisions we make are aligned to our strategic priorities. The goals that we have as a school, as a district, our individual schools each have improvement plans and their goals. And then we have a district master facilities plan, which some of you are aware that we put together in advance of the application for the new high school. And so those are all, aspects of our work that we align our resources to. It's really important that we do stakeholder engagement, which we managed to, we had a number of different forums with the public and with our staff. And with different advisory groups that we facilitate as a school district. I strongly believe that our school leaders, our leadership teams should have a strong say in how they allocate resources. So I want to give them as much flexibility. If we're going to empower people want to work here as leaders of schools. They want to be able to have some flexibility in order to use funds in a way that matches the goals that they've set for their school. And then for us, we are, we're planning and trying to begin the transition to get away from using ESSER funds because they run out at the end of, at the conclusion of this upcoming fiscal year, like ARPA funds that the cities receive. And so that was a priority for us entering this budget process. Next slide. Just some of the high level context that we're faced with. This is not going to be a surprise to many of you. Expenses are going up. Right? Inflation has caused there to be driving costs in everything we do. And we've seen significant increases in our electricity costs. We've seen, obviously the cost of just doing business and everything we do has gone up, but we've also seen rising costs related to our homeless transportation. We've seen a rise in homeless students, which has caused there to be and that's all driven by the economy. We have happy and very fortunate to welcome so many wonderful families to Salem State. In doing so, there is cost to make sure we're transporting students that we didn't have before. So that's one piece of context. We have commitment to contractual requirements that are really important. The core of our workforce is obviously our educators. We're only as strong as the people who are in those seats, and we need to be competitive. We're in the third year of a 3-year contract, or we'll be entering the third year of a contract with the Salem Teachers Union, and we have contractual requirements and commitments that we have to make. Unfortunately, our state aid is basically stagnant. The good news is we came out of minimum aid, which means which is a huge development for the Salem Public Schools, in that every now additional student we receive, we get the full allotment of per pupil expenditure. For a few years, we were not, because our enrollment had dipped so much. But two factors got us out of that minimum aid. One is our enrollment went up for the first time in a long time this year. A lot of that was at the high school level. And we also saw increases in the percentage of students who are multilingual English language learners and low-income students, and that does drive that also drives an increase in the aid. Unfortunately, on the flip side to it, our charter reimbursement went down. So all the gains we would have experienced budgetarily from an increase, I believe it was 80 or so students, which is significant if you get the full amount per student. We didn't realize, because on the back end, our reimbursement for charter dwindled, and that has to do with the formula of how as students stay in charters for a period, an extended period of time, the reimbursement numbers decline. And so, the good news is we hope, I mean, if our enrollment continues to go up, then we're going to see some important increases in state aid. However, we do worry about what those charter reimbursement looks like, and that's advocacy that we can continue to do at the state level. And then the other thing is we have to be cognizant that our ESSER resources are disappearing at the conclusion of this fiscal year, and that's something we had hoped to move more positions over to the operating budget than we were ultimately able to. And we have a lot of planning work to do this summer in advance of next year, because we know that the ESSER funding is running out. At the end of the day, our costs are exceeding expected revenue. And that's why in this budget, we did have to eliminate a series of school and central office positions, which Elizabeth will talk more about. The good news is for us that the moves were achieved by right-sizing the number of classrooms and central office staff we had due to the decline in enrollment that we've had over the last, 5+ years, right? Even though our enrollment has gone up in the last year, the decline has been significant over the last 5 years, and we chose not to address that because of the pandemic and students coming back from COVID. But this year we were forced to be in a position where we did need to right size, and we had to eliminate both central office and school-based positions.
Dr. Zreik, will you just very quickly
Sure.
define for anybody who may be following along what ESSER means?
So ESSER is essentially the COVID relief funds that we received, like the city's ARPA funds that the schools receive, specifically ESSER funds. And the last batch of ESSER runs out on September. I just heard this today, September 30th, 2024. And we have budgeted it out, so we'll continue to invest in what we have through next school year. But then the funding runs out at the conclusion of September 2024.
Thank you.
Next slide. So this is the process, just so you know what we go through. And again, as I said, Ms. Manning is the chair of our finance subcommittee, so she leads a lot of this work. We do quite a bit with the public, and we have multiple forums, as you can see on here. We have presentations to the school committee, budget hearing, and then so folks understand, each school comes and presents their budget first internally to myself and the deputy and assistant superintendent, and then they present to the budget subcommittee of the school committee. They come and each school goes through their budget priorities, allocations. And this year, schools knew that there wasn't money falling out of the sky to add new things, but many schools did make some trades. They shifted resources around their strategic priorities. And those are the conversations we want to get our schools thinking more and more about. It's not always about adding, well, that's nice, right? But it's also about how do you make shifts in your resources? How do you make trades around what your strategic priorities are from year to year? And that's the work that we'll continue to do with our school leaders to make sure that they're meeting the needs of the students that they serve. So this just gives you a sense of the timeline. Obviously, we're here, it says June. We're not quite in June, right? But tomorrow's June. And we are here presenting to all of you our budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth Pauley, who is in her first year, very grateful that she is here. But we want to we don't want to scare her away in year one. And this is her first time presenting to the city council. Sorry.
In theory, you can use those other microphones as well. Just turn them on. If they turn green, they should work, but they don't always turn green.
Okay. I'll sit back a little bit. I think everyone has a hard copy. Everyone in the room has a hard copy of the slides that we're projecting. Didn't miss anyone, right? Excellent. So we come to you this evening with a budget request of $71,154,000. Thank you, $142. This is a 3.5% increase over the FY23 budget. And we arrived at that ask and that percentage increase after the long journey that the superintendent just detailed around working with schools, asking them to work with their school site councils and their parent groups, working with the school committee, and really looking at where our expenses were growing, where we could trim, and what revenue offsets we could apply to the budget. So I'll go into deeper detail on that in a moment, but if you wanted to look at our full budget, it is available on the Salem Public Schools website. It is right on our homepage, so you could read the entire thing, which I think shares some of the accomplishments of this year and some of the exciting things in the budget for the year ahead. So as the superintendent mentioned, our expenses are higher than the proposed budget. So as you do look through the materials, you will see that the total budget is actually $72 million. And I'll explain why in just a moment. But our ask to you tonight is $71,154,142. So as you know, a budget is a story of our revenue and expenses. Our revenue, our largest source of revenue is local contributions. So thank you to the city of Salem for supporting the public schools. Salem contributes not fully 2/3 of our budget, but almost. The next source of funds is Chapter 70, which Dr. Zweig talked about. That is the state's main source of funding for the public schools. And we did see an increase this year, despite seeing cuts in other state aid. We also get grants from the state, from the federal government, and from private grantors. ESSER, the federal relief funds, has been the largest source of funding or grant funding in the last couple of years. And we have used that to support recovery programming, including tutoring, extended summer programming. We've expanded our pre-K programs to help young children get ready for school. We've invested in enrichment, and we've added quite a few positions. In fact, I believe we have 54 positions that are funded by ESSER at this moment in time. So that is the story of our revenue. The other half of our story is expense. So we began the process in October by looking at our known expenses in personnel. Luckily, we have contractual agreements and collective bargaining agreements that lay out what our salary increases will be. So it's fairly predictable to know what our personnel expenses will be. And because personnel is the largest percentage of our budget, this is it feels like the right place to start. It's nearly 80% of our budget is personnel. On average, in the coming year, teachers will receive a 4.4% salary increase. This includes their step and lane change. Other increases for other collective bargaining units range from 3% to 6.2% when you include the step and the lane change. Non-union employees are projected to receive an increase of 2%. So those are our personnel increases, and those account for, as I said, nearly 80%. It's actually 78.5%, and that is very consistent with previous years' investments in personnel. But this year we did see significant rising costs in our non-personnel expenses, and those really, the superintendent outlined the categories into which those fall: homeless transportation, out-of-district tuition, electricity, and insurance. So I'll take a minute and just talk about each of those briefly. Homeless transportation has been a significantly growing increase over the last year due to the increase in the number of students who are experiencing homelessness. Last year in March, there were 145 students experiencing homelessness. And in this March, there were 208 students experiencing homelessness. So that is an increase of 63 students, or 43%. Our students experiencing foster care remained fairly stable. Last year, there were 48 students in foster care, and this year there were 51. So not the same kind of growth that we have seen in our students and families experiencing homelessness. I appreciate that this is a community that welcomes all families, and I think that is something to be proud of. We are grateful to have them in the Salem Public Schools. The transportation costs, though, are not insignificant. Last year, for example, our homeless transportation budget was $650,000. This year, we've spent $800,000. So the costs have increased pretty dramatically in that line item. The next category is out-of-district tuition. So there are students who need a special education placement outside of the district who enroll in private or collaborative settings. Those tuitions are projected to increase substantially in the year ahead. The state has notified us that private placements will increase by 14%. The tuition will increase by 14%, and collaborative placements will increase by 6%. So this translates into a dollar increase of about $1.3 million more in out-of-district tuition. We anticipate being able to offset some of this by prepaying tuition, as was done last year. We know that this number could increase if we have more students who need and receive out-of-district placements. But as you recall, we do have a safety net that the school committee and the city council approved last spring when you established a $550,000 stabilization fund. So we know this is a growing expense. We're trying to mitigate it by prepaying tuition. And in the event that it grows faster than what we have budgeted for, we are grateful for the stabilization fund that was created last year. Electricity. So the cost of our electricity has increased by 20%, and our usage has also increased pretty dramatically in the last few years. We are taking steps to mitigate this. We're participating with the city in an ESCO project to look for cost savings that would allow us to be greener and to save money on energy. But at the high school alone, our electricity usage has tripled since 2019. So we are trying to figure out both why and how we can reduce our consumption. So we have projected a 30% increase in our electricity budget based on the actual spending of this fiscal year. And finally, our insurance has gone up. This is not our health insurance, which, as you more than most would know, the city bears the expense of our health insurance. This is our liability insurance, which has increased by 5% over each of the last 2 years. The superintendent referenced that we are also a smaller district than we have been. Our enrollment a decade ago was 4,500 students. In 2019, that was 4,000 students. And in October of 2022, it was 3,700 students. Now, the good news is our enrollment goes up over the course of the year, but the state dipsticks in October and says, this is your enrollment. And in October, our enrollment was 3,709 students. So that's actually an increase over last year, and we're proud of that. We hope more students will choose and enroll in the Salem Public Schools. And this growth is promising, but it does come with consequences that we are smaller. We do get less state aid. So as we looked at these expenses and tried to figure out how to balance our revenue from the city, our revenue from the state with these expenses, we first looked at where we could cut. And when making those cuts, we wanted to make sure we were not compromising the student experience. And so we looked to make cuts in places that would not dramatically increase the class size for children in the Salem Public Schools. We seek to maintain an average class size of no more than 25 in the elementary schools, although it's lower in the earlier grades. So our goals for K1 or kindergarten and 1 are 21 students per class, 23 students in grades 2 and 3, and 25 students in grades 4 and 5. Those are our goals. And in just about every case, we are well below those. For example, at Witchcraft, grade 2 has 17 students per homeroom. Bates has 23 students in grade 5. Bentley has 22 or 23, which actually is a little bit of an outlier because we place more students in kindergarten in Bentley because of the dual language program. So we looked at whether we could reduce the number of homerooms while staying within our class size limits. And we believe the cuts that we have recommended will allow us to do so, both at the elementary school and at the middle school. I did neglect to say that the Collins Middle School actually has the smallest average class sizes with 16.2 students per class. So we came to the conclusion that a modest number of cuts to the number of homerooms would allow us to stay within our average class size, right size the district, and get to the right budget number. So we have proposed a net of 10 cuts to schools out of 16. We sought to be proportional in the cuts. So first we started with class size, then we looked to make sure that no one school or department was bearing more of the cuts than most in the right sizing. So the net is because we are also adding positions. We're adding 2 positions at the Early Childhood Center because of growing enrollment. Collins actually added 2 special education teachers during the course of this school year, so they will be new on the FY24 budget. And Bentley is shifting a coach to a teacher position. In several instances, the cuts are vacant positions. So, thank you. So in the central office, I would just point out in my office, for example, which is in the bottom right corner, the finance and operations, we do not have an administrator or an office manager because that position has been vacant. So we are not going to fill that position, and that is a cut. It is also the case on the left-hand side of this column in the school-based cuts that in many instances, due to retirements or teachers opting to leave for other reasons, the teacher whose position is being cut can find a job either in the school or elsewhere in the system. So while we have a net of 10 school-based cuts, that does not mean that 10 people are losing their jobs. On the right-hand side, just as you're looking at the slide, these are the central office cuts. We're proposing 6 of those. And as I said before, several of those are vacant positions. Several of those are people who are moving to different positions. And 1 or 2 are people who are leaving the district. So those are the cuts that we are proposing. And as Dr. Zreich mentioned, this isn't the only movement in the district. Several of the schools have traded positions or are reimagining what positions might look like. So for example, the high school has traded a paraprofessional for a clerk position. That's net of 0, so it is not reflected here. Okay, so we looked at our revenue, we looked at our expenses, we made some cuts, and then we got to this chart, which I think is probably easier for you to see on the handout in front of you because it's so small on the screen. The total of our expenses for FY24 actually comes to $72,268,629. And here I've organized it by the 18 cost centers. So you probably remember from last year that the school's budget is organized into 18 cost centers. 11 of those are schools, and the others are services supporting the schools: the district admin, instructional technology, multilingual learners, special education, et cetera. To get from 72 million to the 71 million, which we felt we had to do because the 72 million would be a 5% increase, and we believed that would exceed the resources of the city, which has always been very generous with the Salem Public Schools, but that is far beyond what the average increase to our annual budget has been over the course of the last 10 years. That's where we propose to apply offsets from our school choice revenue, from our prepayment of special education tuition, and then from other receipts as they come in. Facility rental will help support overtime costs for custodians, for example. So we got our budget down to the $71 million number, and believe that we have created this budget in a way that is consistent with the creation of prior year budgets, which included all of those things: cuts, revenue offsets, and looking for areas to trim. So if you do look in the budget book and you see the $72 million, that's where it came from. I would say some of the cost center changes are driven by personnel, but many are driven by the non-personnel expenses that I've already described. So in student and family supports, for example, that's where the homeless transportation budget lives. So their budget increase reflects an increase to homeless transportation Instructional technology has never had as a department a dedicated line for computer hardware. And now we do so much with Chromebooks that we are proposing to create a line that would allow us to continue to replace outdated, old or broken Chromebooks. So their budget appears to have a significant increase as well, but that is a reflection of the direction we have moved in during and after the pandemic. Our operations budget looks like that is growing too, and that's where our electricity bills live. Other jumps that might stand out include Salem Prep. The difference there is actually just a difference in assumptions more than cost of delivering the program. So in in the development of the FY23 budget, there was an assumption that more of the revenue for that school would come from out of district placements. And so students who are paying tuition into the school district. This year, we're assuming fewer out of district tuitions for Salem Prep because that is a reflection of the students who are actually there. So if more students come from out of district, that revenue will increase, but we've based our assumptions more conservatively on the number of tuitions that are there at this moment. So their budget looks like it is increasing as well because of that assumption. So that is the table. And the next couple of slides show you what this looks like in charts, which might be easier to digest. So when you look at our budget, the majority of it is allocated to the 11 schools that we have. The largest allocation is Salem High School. Collins and Witchcraft follow behind. So 67% go to schools, with 33% going to district-wide supports. What are district-wide supports? Well, those are support for multilingual learners. That is professional development. That is special education. That is instructional technology. That is the business office and the superintendent's office. So there are 7 cost centers that are folded into that district-wide supports that comprise that 33%. The allocations I would just add are very similar to last year. The high school was the largest school, followed by Collins and Witchcraft. And this allocation matches the allocation from last year. So that is what it looks like in pie chart form, where the dollars are going. I did mention that personnel is the largest category of expense. So when we look at our personnel costs, and remember, those are almost 80% of our budget, about 69% of that goes to instructional staff. So that includes teaching, early childhood, district-wide teachers like music teachers, behavior specialists, substitutes, long-term subs, stipends for teachers, and extended day salaries. The next largest is administration. So those are supervisors and administrative services, in case you're wondering what that is. Those are clerical and other general service supports. Yeah, so I think the takeaway here is that personnel is the largest part of our budget, and instructional staff is the largest portion of our personnel budget. And our non-personnel expenses. So I feel like a broken record around transportation and tuition and utilities, but that is what we are spending our non-personnel expenses on. And the growth this year in our expenses really is in those categories. So yes.
Just with the transportation, do you have a breakdown about what % of that is for students just transporting them to school, and then what percentage is the homeless population that we're seeing or out of district placement?
Yes, I will have to think about that for a minute, but yes, I have that. The annual regular day budget for transportation is about $1 million. It's a little bit more. It might be $1.1 million. And the homeless transportation budget is $800,000. The special education transportation, I'll actually have to look up, but I can look that up while we're talking. The growth, though, in the regular day transportation is predictable because we have a 3-year contract with NRT. And so that is increasing somewhat, but I believe it is increasing by less than $100,000. So the growth in our expenses have been in homeless transportation over this past year, and what we are anticipating for next year. And I will, as soon as we go to questions, I will get you the special ed number. So just as we wrap up the PowerPoint, this is what the school budget looks like, and you can see the allocation I shared before. It's Salem High, Collins, and Witchcraft. The elementary schools, including ECC, comprise about 51% of the school level budgets. So when we look at enrollment, it matches pretty closely to where our students are. The secondary schools, including New Liberty, Salem Prep, and the high school, are 49% of the school level budget. And then, do you want to say anything about that? Okay, great, good.
So just the final thoughts, you can see our budget requests of 71,154,142, which is a 3.5 increase over the prior fiscal year. We talked about the links to our vision, values, and priorities. Elizabeth talked about maintaining the integrity of the student experience, which I feel strongly this budget does. We were responsive to the community staff, our school leaders, and then the school committee has given us a lot of feedback about this budget, on this budget. We've appreciated the process this year working with Anna Friedman, interim mayor or acting mayor Bob McCarthy. We met early on to make sure we were working within the fiscal constraints of the city. And there was a lot of dialogue really from December as Mayor Driscoll was moving out. So we do think that this is responsible within the city's constraints. I do just want to, we do have to be prepared that FY25 could be really challenging with the COVID relief money ending, new contractual obligations, and hopefully the state aid isn't flat. But if it is flat again, there's gonna be some challenges that we need to prepare for, and we're committed to doing a lot of that work even this summer to get ahead of this, because we could be coming back next year with more painful cuts. But with enough time and thoughtfulness and partnership with the city, I'm hopeful that doesn't need to happen. And then again, the budget is online for people to review. I very much appreciate the support of the city council. You've been great to work with and have been very supportive of the schools. And the generosity has not gone unnoticed and has made a significant impact on the experience of young people. So just turn it back over to you if there's any, or Councilor McLean. I guess the show is yours, and so I'll turn it back to you.
Well, I think the show is mostly yours. So I'm sure you're about to get a lot of questions. So yeah, have a sip of water, take a deep breath. A lot will be asked. I'm going to start with some sort of big tent questions. I think first I will ask, it was noted a couple times in passing that the actual appropriation request is a little bit lower than the budget request. If you could speak specifically to what are the offsets between those two numbers.
Yeah, the two largest are the $575,000 prepayment of special education tuition. And then we propose to spend $500,000 from our school choice funding. So we're getting to over $1 million with cash we have on hand. There are other offsets, for example, the facility rental that I mentioned. We get reimbursed for one of our ROTC or half of our ROTC teacher salaries. We are reimbursed by the STU for part of the STU president's time. So the other ones are significantly less. So the two big ones are the prepayment and the school choice.
Thank you. Second sort of big tent question I will ask relates to the ESSER funding. You were very clear that funding is time limited and that time is coming. I think I heard you mention that we have 50+ staff who are being funded by that right now. What does the school system stand to lose when that funding runs out, both at a district-wide level as well as at the school level? I mean, what losses are we facing?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that. A lot of the positions are, the biggest chunk of the positions, over $1 million, is our pre-K program. And that is where I'm most, if you want to know what gives me panic attacks, it's the pre-K program. because we did fund, we've been hopeful and we'll continue to work with our friends on Beacon Hill around funding for early childhood education. But that is the most significant. The other roles are behaviorist positions. That we have tutors that we've used since COVID. I'm not suggesting that they aren't important positions, but we never banked on those positions being here beyond 3 years. So if you would ask me what I'm concerned about, the thing I'm most concerned about is just over $1 million which is the majority, which is in pre-K salaries for the classrooms that we opened at Bates and at Horace Mann, teacher, paraprofessional, professionals. We've also invested in the ECC expansion as well. We've also opened after school care. So that is what keeps me up at night. And that's what I think will have the most significant impact on the school system a year from now if we can't figure out a way to fund that. The other roles I don't see as significant. We didn't have them pre-COVID. And I think they've been very helpful in helping with recovery, but not as essential as clearly pre-K has been.
I share your concern. I also want to ask you about the fluctuating, I guess I will say, enrollment number. You noted that is a factor in the calculation of the state support. The moment at which that number is being measured factors into the formula. What is the source of the fluctuation? Why is that number different in
so-
October than it might be later?
It's really interesting to watch now that it's in my third year in Salem. The enrollment is at its highest right now for us. We are at, I think we're over 3,800 right now. And so we grow almost 100 students from the beginning of the year. And then we seem to then decline over the summer. Some of that this year has been, we welcome all the families to Salem State. That helped our numbers grow. And the state is reimbursing us. I want to be clear for the students who are in the homeless, who are experiencing homelessness at Salem State. So we are getting funds because they weren't calculated as part of our October 1 data. And because the state places them there, we will eventually get resources for this fiscal year and for next fiscal year because they weren't part of either calculation. But we do see students come all year long. There's a transient population here. And so unfortunately for us, they take our enrollment to determine our funding at the worst possible time for us, which is at the beginning of the school year. If they took it now, we'd have 100 more students than we did in October, right? So, and that's just the formula that the state has. I'm hopeful that our numbers will continue. We're seeing upticks at Salem High School in particular with students coming back to the district, which I think bodes very well. And we got to continue that trend. We're over 900 students. Now we were under 800 students 2 years ago at Salem High School. So I think we've got to continue to invest in the programs that people want. Our CTE programs I seem to be obviously they're in demand. Our advanced coursework, our athletics programs, our music programs are starting to bring more students back, and we've got to continue to do that. I'd love to see. I'm not going to declare victory, but if we can get over 1,000 students at Salem High. And I know that's Principal Burns and I talk about how can we get to that number, that will bode well for us in the future. But that's, there's a lot of competition out there and people are making decisions about what they think is best for their children. And we've got to make sure we're more competitive.
Chronic absenteeism.
Mhm.
You noted it's been a little bit intractable. What are you seeing as the roots of that issue? How do you see your strategy to address it reflected in this budget? Do you see a relationship between that and the homeless transportation growth and cost? How does that play out in the numbers?
Well, I mean, the good news is right now we're trending much better in chronic absenteeism for this current school year. We're almost back to pre-pandemic numbers, it looks like, from before. And Salem had really high chronic absenteeism even before the pandemic, like shockingly high, in my opinion. I think a lot of it does have to do, transportation plays a part for sure. I think the fact that we don't have neighborhood schools plays a role in that. But ultimately, I think chronic absenteeism is a symptom of engagement. And when kids are engaged, they come to school, right? And when they feel good about school, they feel like they belong. And we're seeing some major improvements at Salem High School. Collins this year, we've seen improvements in chronic absenteeism. But we've got a long way to go. In that, I think it's predominantly, especially for the upper grades, has to do with, not that parents don't have a role in getting kids to school, but, middle school and high school kids, they're the ones who, motivate themselves to get up and get to school on time and every day. When it's younger, it's harder to put that on the kids themselves. Parents are much more involved in that. So we've got to continue to invest in are engaging young people. We're very fortunate. We have a new grant coming in for middle school sports that we already invest in middle school sports, but we have another $30,000 coming in next year for just only middle school athletics. I think that will help. We've invested in this budget in home visits. The schools came to us in each of their presentations. Mary can attest to that. They asked for money to do home visits. They want to visit families that they don't feel are connected to schools. Some of the schools in Salem have done that historically, like Bentley, but more schools want to do those visits over the summer with teachers and staff to build relationships with families who don't feel that connection to school. It's not about kids being sick. It's not about kids, bad parents. It's not about that. It's about levels of connection and engagement that I think play a significant role. I think homelessness does factor in. Kids there are some families that do struggle to get to school. Salem's not the easiest place to get around. And because we don't have neighborhood schools, if you miss the bus or, it's not easy to find your way. Salem High and Collins are not exactly, around the corner from where the majority of our kids live. So, we've got to continue to make sure that the transportation options, I dream of being able to be able to round up kids who, wake up late or miss the bus in the morning to be able to get as many kids to school. Because it's not like they missed the bus and they can easily walk to school. That's challenging, especially in inclement weather for some of our families.
And out of district tuition,
Yep.
significant cost, grew quite a bit. What are the services that those families are traveling to obtain? Do we have any hope of at some point providing those services so that we're not paying that traveling tuition?
Well, that increase is a statewide issue. The 14% has been a source of issue, advocacy that's been going on with districts, the Superintendent's Association, School Committee Association, because it's more about increases. It's not about the number of kids. It's about the increase in tuition. We have, I think, our numbers are still lower than what they were pre-pandemic in number of kids that go out of district. Salem does a pretty good job, I think, of offering specialized programs for kids who need it. But we can't serve every child. And, we do have students with significant disabilities that we can't necessarily serve in the district. That's not a product. The budget number is more of a product of what we're projecting for private placements for students that are very involved. 14% is exceedingly high. And so there's a lot of tension. I'm hopeful. I mean, this is a place where I hope in the end, the number will be a lot lower and we'll be able to, we've said if any of the money comes back, it'll help us pull stuff off of ESSER. But we had to budget 14% because we just needed to be conservative in the event that that's what actually happened. But there's, I know our state rep and our senator are lobbying on behalf of our districts right now that 14% is exceedingly high, as you heard the number from Elizabeth. That's what that number is about. It's not about more kids. It's about the cost of tuition going up.
Thank you for that clarification. We're going to move on to questions and comments. Is there anybody here who's not planning to ask a question? So I will just go right around the table. And I think everybody probably has something to say. So I'm just going to start right here with Councilor Dominguez, and we'll just make our way around for round one.
Thank you, Chair McLean. Thank you, school superintendent and assistant superintendent for being here. Very, very well presentation, clear. I had a couple of questions, but I'm going to limit myself to one because everybody have a question. My only question is on the part where it say on page 14, the multi-language learning education seem to change 22% negative. Related to what I see on the chart of the, I think 54% of the students are second language learning. So that kind, to me, doesn't kind of related to exactly who we are here in Salem. So can you elaborate a little bit about that, please?
Yes, and I was remiss to not mention that. So thank you for raising that. Salem's growth is in multilingual learner students, and we are a district where we speak many languages, and proudly so. So the reason for this cut is because they are one of the departments, one of the central departments that is giving up a position. The person who held the position of World Language Coordinator has resigned and has left the district. So that position is one of the cuts that we are making, and the duties of that person are being assigned to a new position in our district-wide regular day, which does all of the professional development for all of the teachers. So that the new position is a grade 6 through 12 curriculum director. And the expectation is that the person taking that position will incorporate the duties of the World Language Coordinator position, and incorporate the strategies that the multilingual department uses with its own teaching and Teachers for Professional Development, so that all teachers in the district will have access to them, because those are who our students are. So in a very small department, a position loss reflects as a very large percentage cut. The department itself is the staff that are centrally budgeted. And so there are multilingual teachers at the schools that are assigned to the schools, but this reflects the central office budget for multilingual learners. So it is down a position, which was an administrator position. And that is why the cut looks so large, because it was a small central department to begin with.
Can I just also add that one thing we should point out where we've seen a major increase in expenses is translation and interpretation, which we feel very positively about. But we now have a full-time person, and people know that she's there. So they're requesting, which is a good thing, right? But we've also blown through our budget this year. Good reason. And we have so many more families who are multilingual. But I do appreciate the fact that our staff knows that there's a responsibility to make sure that families get information in their native language. And so we have a person coordinating all that. I would put up our system against any school district in the state, because, and the school committee has seen it, that we have a dashboard of how many requests there are, for what reasons, what languages, which schools are requesting. And we've seen a significant increase. We also had to right size the budget for that this year. If you're talking about multilingual learners and families, I forget, I mean, you would know the number of how much it's increased in the last, our translation and interpretation.
Yeah, we, in this fiscal year, had budgeted $40,000 for translations. We currently have unpaid bills of $70,000. So we have long since spent our $40,000. We've budgeted over $100,000 to increase those services. Those actually aren't in the multilingual department either. They're in the Student and Family Services department. But
I really appreciate you answer. I think clarify a lot, but the number growing in the multi-language learning students, the department is still, it'll be, I think, should be the opposite. We should expand that department, make sure that we really address those needs of those the community, which is actually growing. 54% of the entire population is students. So I thought that we're going to see a difference expected into this. I know that there might be some items in another part of the budget, but I mean, how can we explain that into the general population in terms of we're growing in one side,
yeah,
but we're diminishing the resources that we allocated for?
So the teaching positions are not in that budget. They're at the school level. So we actually have an increase in multilingual teachers in for next year, but schools, that's a place where schools have traded to have more multilingual. You're right. The numbers are going up, but what you're looking at is the administrative line, which we cut a coordinator for world language. The teachers themselves are in the different school budgets. So they're actually, it wouldn't come out here because they're lumped in with all the other teachers at the respective schools. But in reality, we have added multilingual teachers because we have, for compliance reasons, we have to with the growth in numbers. So if you look at the number of multilingual teachers now, I mean, 3 years ago versus now, we do have an increase. I can get you those numbers. And but that wouldn't, that's not going to appear on the that's not part of that budget that saw a decline. That's at the individual schools because the people are assigned to the different schools.
Counselor Stott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wrote my questions down, so I won't be all over the map, but I have 4. I'll start with one that kind of pings off of fellow Councilor Dominguez's questions about the translation services. It made me think of the new, perhaps new or moving of the Parent Information Center down to the Point. I was wondering if you could explain any budget aspects of that and perhaps the plan.
Might need to turn to the city on that one. Okay, you want to ask
That's in
another?
partnership with the
Yeah, it's
city.
in partnership. Do you want to ask your next question and then we'll get back to that one?
My other question is around the transportation that you noted. So 1 million increase plus almost an additional 1,800,000 for the homeless population. Is that under the same contract, the NRT contract? So it's a different contract.
So the homeless transportation is held by a variety of different vendors. So part of that is through Bay State, which provides the lion's share of students experiencing homelessness who are in Salem, attending Salem Public Schools. But part of the rise in expenses is if a student is attending Salem Public Schools, but is currently sheltered in another community, we share the cost of getting the student here with the host community. Similarly, we have some students who are sheltering in Boston or in Salem who are enrolled in Boston Public Schools. So we share the costs with Boston. We have students coming from really all over Eastern Massachusetts. And so we have many vendors for our homeless transportation. NRT is mostly not one of them.
Thank you. And then kind of a piggyback of the transportation and chronic absenteeism. One comment that you made that I have thought about often is the students that misses their bus or can't get around, almost like a skipper, but specifically for students, using one of those NRT buses. My daughter is at Carleton and she was evacuated last minute. And within like 5 minutes, they got a bus there at the end of the bike path to get all the students to the high school. And I was like, where are the buses all day? So I don't know if that's been, tossed around as an idea or discussed at all.
Yeah, so we're trying to, this is going to be part of our strategic plan is figuring out the transportation needs. I really am interested in purchasing more nimble multi-purpose vans, which can be driven by staff because we have transportation needs that are to and from school. But then there's a whole host of transportation needs during the school day, to and from internships, to and from early college, to it, the smaller teams going, the debate team, the ski team going to places, transporting kids back and forth from Collins to the Salem High. We want to get kids from New Liberty and Salem Prep to go to the CTE programs at Salem High. So we now have 3 vans. I think it's 3 or 2 and 1 coming. Sorry, 2 and 1 coming. And I envision that those vans could be driven by someone to do exactly what you're saying. We haven't been set up to do that in the past, but that is exactly what I'd like to see happen with the vehicles that we do own. It doesn't have to be a big school bus. It could just be one of the multi-purpose vans driving to pick up kids in the city.
Actually, before we leave transportation, our special education transportation budget for next year is $1.1 million for out of district and $576,000 for students in district. So that is compared to 1.1 million for regular day and 800,000 for homeless.
Yeah, do you want to?
So I'll just preface it by saying so the On Point Center is in the Parks and Recreation Capital Projects. And Anna can outline kind of the funding plan. It's in design phase right now. The person who's the project manager is not with the city anymore. So we're kind of going through a process of reassigning that project to keep it on track. But it is a city-funded project in a park that will eventually be maintained and house a school department office. So a partnership project, a little complicated, but one that we're continuing to advance. I'll let Anna speak to the funding.
Thank you. And this is, as the mayor noted, in the capital plan for another department. The funding that is currently identified in the capital plan for FY24 is around, so the project as we understood it, as it was presented at the time, was looking at a funding need of around $650,000. We identified that we had a little over $54,000 remaining in a CDBG allocation. So those funds are available for expenditure. And the remaining gap was just under $400,000. And so after some analysis, we identified that ARPA may be the best use of funds based on the intended use for that space. We also received an earmark in the current year for $200,000 from the state. And we've been working to spend down that earmark. We're currently planning, I believe, to spend around $75,000, hopefully by the end of the year, on some architectural drawings. And so the building department was helping us work on that. And then we are hoping to roll the rest of that earmark into next year to apply to other work on the project. But as the mayor noted, the project manager did depart the city. And so we're a little bit behind, I think, where we had otherwise intended to be. And so we are hoping to get those drawings soon so that we can determine if any additional funding might be needed or just how to proceed with next steps at this stage, and then determine timing for when that project, when the construction can begin.
Thank you. So that's a couple of years off, it sounds like, but an exciting project. Two more questions, one a charter school and one about school resource officers. Kind of a big tent question. I'll go for the charter school one. I always hear that charter school funding affects our bottom line, revenues, expenses, and I never quite understand why. Is it because the lots of students? Or I don't know if you could explain kind of high level how the charter school funding affects.
You're lucky.
This is a really great question. So for charter schools, there are two ways that this affects basically the resources that are available to the city's bottom line. There are basically the Chapter 70 money, and the simplest way to sort of say it is the Chapter 70 money sort of follows the student when they go to the charter school. And so when a student, if a Salem student enrolls in a charter school, there is a funding formula that the state has developed that will reimburse the district for the costs that they would have otherwise received for that aid on a step down basis. I believe it's 100% the first year, 60% the second year, and 40% the third year, pretty sure. After that, it rolls off. And so if we have a student that maybe goes to the charter school in middle school and stays all the way through high school, those last couple of years in the charter school, we won't receive any reimbursement for the state aid money we would have otherwise received for that student. So what can happen? So there's that piece. So what occurs is that we get our Chapter 70 money in. We then have an assessment that we pay back, which is the money that goes to the charter schools to pay for the education of those students. And then on the other side of the ledger, there's a reimbursement we're getting that's trying to help offset some of that assessment based on where the students are that have enrolled are in the course of their sort of step down with that formula. This year in particular, we are kind of hitting a point where we must have many students that have rolled off the reimbursement formula. And so the amount of money that we are being reimbursed has decreased. At the same time, our assessment has increased. And what goes into that assessment is also similar to what goes into like the Chapter 70 formula. And so our assessment went up. At the same time, our reimbursement went down. And so the net effect was almost $1.2 million, which almost offset all of the Chapter 70 increase that we would have otherwise received for this year. I can provide more clarifying because it's a bit complicated to talk about that. And it doesn't necessarily mean that there are more students enrolled in charters because we are capped. It just means where they are in that formula at any given year.
And then my last question about the school resource officer, and this is kind of, again, multi-department, sorry, but I just learned last night during the police budget hearing that there is
the one full-time school resource officer is based at the Collins School. And I just was curious about if you were involved with the decision-making of that at all, of placing them there and how that is working out.
Well, there's one that's placed at Salem High School and one that's placed at Collins. So, is that maybe there's,
So last night we were told there was one full-time at Collins and then one that floats.
right.
But they're mostly at the high school. It sounds.
I mean, the home base is the high school. So yeah, the chief and I do talk about the assignments. Historically, that's what's been done. The two largest schools get have the resource officers, Collins and Salem High School. I would say both of them do float. I mean, the one at Collins ends up going to other schools depending on the need. Also, they go to Salem Academy if there's a need as well. So, I am involved in the decision with the chief. I think the one that we have, it's the SRO at Collins. This is his first year there. He's been a good match for the school. He's got the right temperament for working with young students. Continues to receive training. I have to say I'm pretty impressed just in general with the mindset around this isn't a school to prison pipeline. There is meant to be a relationship with, and a lot of this comes from the chief and his philosophy as well, which I appreciate around school officers. I've gotten positive feedback from the administrators at Collins in terms of that person's interaction with young people outside playing football, out of recess, engaging in the kids in a very positive way. I have been in other places where I have been concerned that it, contributes to a pipeline to criminalize kids, which I, have significant concerns about. I think the chief and I've received a lot of questions on both sides of this. I was just at a parent event meeting, and half of the table seemed to be interested in having more police officers in the school, and the other half of the table wanted to see no police officers in schools. So I do think as a community, we have to have more conversations about the role and solicit input from stakeholders about, I happen to think that there is a role, but it has to be with very clear guidelines and boundaries, because I have seen, not here in Salem, but in previous places where it has contributed to if kids get involved in a fight, which happens in schools, in every school I've ever been in my own education, it doesn't mean that children should end up being arrested, right? And I don't see that here in Salem, but those lines are ones that we have to make sure those are careful lines. And I'm sure Miss Manning, probably not tonight, could talk about the history of SROs in schools in Salem. Yep.
Say, just going back to when we started this years ago, there were always two. And for a long time, back till I guess it's like 2014, there were two based Collins and high school, but fluid between the two.
Mhm.
There wasn't one and one. They were both floating. And it was in Salem going back, 2 or 3 police. It's always been very fast and pipe. Now the point is not to. But
I'm sorry to interrupt. Can you just bring the microphone closer? I'm getting messages that people can't hear you.
But it's also good to have the around, because they do get to know kids and they know families, and they would go out and do night rides, and that could go with to relate with families. But the point always was to be available to all the schools. So all through from the beginning of the inception of the program at Salem, if an elementary school had an issue going on, whether it was an immediate issue that solved or an ongoing thing that they needed the school resources help, they always, both of them could float any school in the system. And when the charter came, that in. History is floating, but the history is also relationship building as opposed to punitive. Need the help. They're also very right on the spot. One, you know, I mean, even back wasn't a resource officer, he was a juvenile officer, which is a whole separate position the city used. Peter was like the detective in West Side Story. But, those kinds of things, you know, all. I know there's concern, some, but there's a history of they do belong to schools. They're just based at certain.
Thank you. This is all helpful, especially it's something newer to me that I'm learning about. My Carleton student, even she mentioned that they have stopped by recently, the school's school resource officer. So I do agree that they float around to the different schools. And I think that's good, especially for relationship building and not just showing up when there's a problem or an issue or, I mean, everybody loves Derby, but now it's like, what happened that Derby's showing up? So it's good to have them visiting on a relationship basis. I agree with that. Just for my own knowledge, because again, I'm not familiar with them. Are they like fully uniformed in the school, these school with weapons?
They do have weapons, but they wear like a polo
Mhm.
shirt that says Salem Police on it. And they do have weapons. Yeah. The chief and I have gone back and forth. They used to be fully uniform. Now he has them just wearing a polo shirt when they come to school, but they do have their weapons with them. Yeah.
And then my last question on this, because I think this might be getting outside the scope of budget, but you mentioned policy and how things have done or what was done in the past or how the program has been run before. Is there anything in policy now about the purpose of the school resource officer?
We have an MOU with the Salem Police that we are required to sign on an annual basis. And that's something we can discuss with the city council, in the future. But that we have a MOU that we sign with Chief Miller, and we talk every year. We sit down and talk about the parameters in that MOU. And so we do talk about the different roles. I will say the other place that I neglected to mention this, they're incredibly helpful with drills that our Alice drills and we're now working on reunification. What happens if there is a crisis? How do you reunify students with their families? And so they are right now going out to every school to practice with the schools. So they do go on site for the drills when we do them, evacuation drills, Alice drills. And then obviously if a situation happens, they are the first deployed to support, in schools. But I do think it's probably a good conversation for a future school committee, city council joint meeting to talk about SROs because they're not in our purview. And actually in this case, the city pays for the SROs in the schools. And so it isn't one of those joint partnership, areas that I do think that's probably a good conversation between the school committee and the city council in the future.
Great, thank you. Perhaps that'll be one of those items that can come up in the state of the schools conversation. I'm going to jump out of order a little bit. Counselor Watson Felt has their hand raised. I know there are some time constraints related to travel, so I want to make sure they can get into the conversation. Counselor Watson Felt, I think you're already a panelist and should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you, Chair McLean. Through you to Dr. Strike and the panel. And I appreciate everyone's flexibility tonight as I just about plan to board a plane. Dr. Strike and team, I have one question particular to how your priority around supporting mental health supports within schools, as well as training teachers to manage disordered behavior in
Counselor
classrooms
Watson
shows.
Felt, I'm sorry to interrupt you. We didn't hear the beginning of your sentence because you were muted. If you could just start at the beginning.
Oh no, can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. We can hear you now.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. I was just going to say I have questions around how the priority to support students' mental health, as well as support teachers and train them to handle disorderly behavior in classrooms, shows up in this year's budget, particularly around the areas of the number one priority being staff development and training. as it reconciles with the 6% of non-union staff focused on, sorry about the noise in the background, if you can hear that, focused on the mental health and counseling services in schools. I know it's mental health concerns and disorderly behavior in classrooms, and the ability to manage those things and recognize those things and support students that are having issues in real time has been a priority of Dr. Strikes and his teams in the past. And I would just love to better understand how that shows up in this year's budget. Thanks.
That's a great question. And, I'm happy, Counselor, to talk to you about going more in depth at any point about that. But two quick responses to that. The first is, so we've invested heavily in the telehealth, mental health with Cartwheel. And actually, I was on a call this morning. We're spending $70,000, which is being matched by a grant for a total of $140,000 for the telemental health. We had 133 family or students utilize the telemental health since we launched it in January, and we are going to increase to over, I think it's about 250 seats or places for students for the next school year, which would be for a full school year with our partner. We've had a very positive experience with them. They have counselors who speak multiple languages. It can be done outside of school, at home, and the response, I think I saw the survey results are 90% satisfaction from families. So this budget does reflect that, that the money that we've allocated, we're going to continue to do that. I do worry about continuing it beyond, I think the grant will run out at the end of next year as well for the 70,000. So it becomes $140,000 that we have to account for. But that's been a significant enhancement to our mental health offerings. To your second question, we are investing in de-escalation training for every teacher to start the school year, this upcoming school year. We have a partnership with Safety Care, and every one of our staff will get the de-escalation portion of it. There's a restraint portion of it, which is only used for extreme situations, but the de-escalation portion of how teachers manage challenging behavior or dysregulation from students, that is I'm not sure that it's an elevated cost because we have that partnership already, but that is a commitment we're making to start for the upcoming school year. And it is also a major part of our new teacher induction program for new staff that we hire. So I hope that answers, and I can go in depth later on with you, Counselor, because I think you asked, that's got to be a keen focus of ours moving forward.
Thanks, I appreciate that. I do have two follow-up questions just with regards to the budget. So, well, actually, one is not with regards to the budget. I guess the first question I have with regards.
I'm sorry.
Yes.
I think school committee member Manning is going to add some info there.
Add to the
Oh, please.
to the teaching and learning question. And the other piece to remember is that although there are specific curricula for different grade levels on social, emotional, learning, the majority of the impact and the effectiveness of those depends on how much those topics are also integrated into all of it. You don't take a period of a day and teach a child social, emotional learning, say, okay, now it's time. That all has to be integrated into everything. And that whole department, that whole area is under the Department of Teaching and Learning, which is under Kate Boney, other assistant superintendent in charge of all the curriculum. So it's an infused area beyond just being specifically taught, because those kind of things really need to be taught in real life situations, such as the classroom.
I would agree with that. I think my specific question with regards to de-escalation training for all of current teachers, is that mandatory training this summer, or is it an optional part of their professional development?
No, it'll be a part of the back to school training, which every teacher is required to participate because it's our professional days before school starts.
Terrific, thank you. And then with regard to the telehealth supports that you've already explained a little bit about, can you speak to, is that available to grade school families as well through 12th grade?
3rd through 12th grade.
And are you, of the numbers that you that you explained earlier today, are you seeing those actually being leveraged by families of middle schoolers and grade schoolers, or only high school or predominantly high school families?
It's interesting. I only know this because I had all this data shared with me today. It was perfectly broken down by the different grade spans between third and 12th. We thought it was going to be mostly high school, but it actually was pretty balanced. And they do take every kind of insurance. They will work with part of the partnership is that it helps deal, it will offset, it will support students that don't have insurance or have mass health. And then they work off of the insurance for people, for those that are insured. So it really, any family can take advantage of it if they are referred. They have to be referred by one of our City Connects coordinators.
So that was my next question. I think a lot of the time the issue lies in the moment, right? Which is to what school committee member Manning mentioned. And I think my concern or my question is, how are students getting connected with this program, especially at younger ages? Is it through direct contact with families, or is there real-time support being offered in the moment?
Well, there's real-time support by the counselors we do have in the schools. And we have the best ratio I've ever seen in any public school in Massachusetts. But they are getting connected for the longer term connection to mental health. They're getting that connection through the City Connects coordinators at the school. Parents reach out to them or they reach out to families, and that's where the connections are made. The referrals have been flying fast since January. And so the connections are being made, and these are students that weren't necessarily receiving services. And like you said, it could be, there's different reasons why in the moment there could be stress at home. There can be a bullying issue at school. There can be, a divorce, that impacts a child. And so these services are available for students in the moment who need to access those services quickly. The turnaround is 1 to 2 days.
Okay, and then last question, I promise.
Sure.
Is
No.
there any part of this budget invested in programming to teach students how to manage their own behavior and mental health concerns within the classroom day to day?
I wouldn't say directly. There is investments that we continue to make around restorative practices and restorative learning for students. And so there is also resources around student, advocacy and voice. I'm not sure directly to your question that there's resources around teaching them directly, but are you talking about something like mindfulness?
Well, yeah, and regulating their own behaviors
Yeah,
in the moment,
regulating
how
their own
to,
behavior.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I think the expectation is that our educators are trained to be able to teach kids directly how to do that. But to your point, I do think that we could be doing a better job of that as a system.
Yeah, I would be happy to support funding for programs like that. Thank you very much. Yeah.
I wanted to add again, I think there is some degree of that going on in some of the social emotional curriculum that are, depending on the grade level, more or less intense. But I think that is where you would find some of that taking place, but not under the name maybe of self-regulation. I think that you wouldn't see it in the budget, those kinds of lines, but you would have that terminology used with some of the children, and depending on the age and the grade level, and the emphasis on learning those skills without delineating them, like as maybe you're looking for in a budget situation. I think those are imbued in the curriculum that we've adopted as a system.
Okay, thank you very much. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you. Okay, Counselor Morcillo.
Thank you, Chair. Pre-K, a couple questions. Are you following the students from pre-K into the elementary level to kind of assess how they're doing as compared to the kids that didn't go through the pre-K?
Yeah, we're going to do a presentation for the school committee at some point before the end of the summer on that. The first cohort right now is in kindergarten because we just started 2 years ago. And so we are following it. We have internal assessment data. And so we are going to do a presentation on that. The early data is very positive. It's, I mean, not surprisingly, because we're not just, it's a mixed delivery model. So it's not only the sale. I got to always remember that it's not just about the programs we expanded, but we're investing in our community partners as well with some of this ESSER funding that we received. So some of our coach works, we have two coaches that not only work with the Salem Public School classes, they work with the YMCA, they work with Salem Community Childcare because they're partners of ours. So we would consider all of that being an impact and an investment in early childhood because those are the kids that are coming to us anyway, whether they're in Salem Public Schools classes or in the community partner classes that we've invested in.
That's great. What's the plan for how long you're going to be following them? Like,
Well, I think we should be following them all. I mean, this is a case study in
Yeah.
in the value of pre-K. So if we want to make a case for why we need funding, I think we have to follow them.
Yeah.
So we will. I mean, I would say we shouldn't have a choice. We need to follow them.
good.
Yeah.
I think that there's about just under 200 students in the pre-K in
right.
Salem. So how many are there in the other programs?
I don't have the exact numbers. Probably double that. I mean,
Oh, so
yeah,
we're talking maybe 400 students
yeah, 400 to 500 students total. Yeah,
in pre-K.
I mean, there's more, but in the programs that we're directly
Right.
investing in, yeah, it's about 500 kids. Yeah.
And how many students in kindergarten?
And remember that's 3 and 4 year olds.
Right.
So
Yep.
yeah. So our kindergarten classes are around 220 right now.
That's pretty good. Okay.
Yep.
So would you say that most kids coming into the school system are getting a pre-K program?
Yeah, I think it's more like 50 to 60%. I think there's still a number of students who never attend school before they come to kindergarten. And there's some that are in home daycare programs. And then there's others that just move in to the city. So, I mean, we're getting close to a stronger saturation. And the teachers, have anecdotally told me, but the data also shows it as well that kids are coming out of our programs are. I mean, our early data is really promising. Obviously, the kids that we have in the other elementary and middle school grades have all been impacted by the pandemic. But this new group of kids last year, and not that they weren't impacted, but their schooling didn't get interrupted in the same way.
Do we have the capacity to expand the number of students in pre-K?
We do. I mean, my dream was to house them all in the Salem Public Schools, but that's not a very popular thing with community partners who also feel committed, who are committed to, and they're, staples in the community. So I sort of was told to relax a little bit on that. We do have the room in our schools for sure. Some of you know that Pathways, which is a Head Start program, runs out of Horace Mann. We don't invest in that. They're not one of our grantees, or we don't invest in them, but they're in our school. So we give them space. That's a whole nother group of students who end up coming to the Salem Public Schools as well. But there is room. Yeah.
So at the state level,
Yes.
the hope is that there's funding for pre-K.
Yep.
Where does that stand?
I've been trying. I've been at this for too long. Even in my prior district, I've had a lot of conversations with Lieutenant Governor Driscoll about this. I don't have a good update of where we stand right now. There seems to be, I was very hopeful that the federal conversation around childcare for, children under 5 was moving along. It doesn't, I don't have a recent update on this. I do know that there's an appetite on the part of the Healy administration to do this work. But the communities that have been able to do it thus far have had, like Cambridge has just flipped to all, have open seats for all pre-K students in the district, I think for next year. We're one of the few. I think Springfield's done it, but they've been able to find the money, they're wealthier cities. I mean, Cambridge is a wealthier city. They've been able to do that. There's just not many communities that have the funding to do that. I think we would need support from the state to do it. So I don't have a good answer on where we stand. And I think that's something we've got to roll our sleeves up again to try to figure out how to make it happen here.
So for the money that you've given to the other programs, the Y program, for instance, is that to expand their program? Because they always had a preschool program,
Not to
didn't they?
expand, it's to be able to support them with increasing teacher pay, because they pay their teachers a lot less. Salem Public School teachers get paid more. It's also been to invest in their curriculum support. We have coaches that are part of their responsibilities to work with those programs as well, professional development materials, so that they're up to the same standard as, higher standard, because those programs are not well funded at all, especially ones that, many students are on vouchers. So that's how we use the funding. We also have a state grant on top of it, that called a CPPI grant, that also supports some of the investment on top of what the school system is. I am hopeful that there's going to be a funding stream connected to some of that grant funding that we've already received. But I don't have a good answer right now. I hope to be able to come back to you. I need to come back to you in a year with a better answer.
Well, I hope the state can find some money in the budget for it. The homeless transportation. So if I understood correctly, we are going to get reimbursed for the state aid for those students?
We're going to get reimbursed for so homeless transportation in general, the city, in a normal year, homeless kids come in and out of districts. The city does get reimbursed for homeless transportation during the course of the year, just in general. Not always 100%, some percentage of what we budget. It's a moving target though, because you never know how many kids are coming in. And as Elizabeth said, there's also kids who who reside in Salem, but they go to schools in other districts, and we end up having to cost share. We can never predict what that number is. The students that were moved by the state specifically to the Salem State housing, we are going to get a reimbursement for those children. It can be used. Other districts didn't have like the staffing. They didn't, in our case, we're going to use the funding for transportation, even though our policy says we don't necessarily have to transport those kids, because they live within, they technically live within the distance that we don't have to provide transportation. The fact is, they're homeless families living in a very hard place to get to school, right? The schools that they go to. So we have made the decision as a community or as a school district, with the support of the school committee, to transport those students. The reimbursement that we're going to get for specifically those, 50 students, we are going to put all towards the transportation costs, because we have room in our schools. We don't need to hire more staff based on our enrollment. We don't need the translation and interpretation support, because we have that. We have most of it, we have. And so we're choosing to use that for transportation. So we are getting reimbursed for this fiscal year and for the next fiscal year, because they weren't technically here on October 1, so they did not count for our enrollment. And so we are getting reimbursed for this current. We haven't received a check yet, but it's coming. It's in the mail, is what we're told.
It's in the mail.
Yeah.
Okay. So transportation is always one of those things that drives me crazy. And you mentioned something about neighborhood schools, which,
Mhm.
yeah. So is there any work being done to
Yeah.
study that?
I think we look at the new building project as an opportunity to really look at that conversation. The master facilities program, the master facilities plan did push us to think about, one of the recommendations was to begin having conversations about that. I do think that I don't want to speak for the school committee, but there are number of members of the school committee that have intimated that they want to have those conversations as part of this, of the high school plan. Whatever the high school plan ends up being in terms of the configuration, it's probably the opportune time to talk about the whole system. When you make a change like that, you might as well if you're going to make a change, you might as well look at everything. And so I do think my personal opinion is it's something we need to look at. And I know committee members want to dive into that. We're one of the few districts in the state that has choice. there are pros and cons to it. And there are many, I hear both families on both sides, both sides of it. I know it's a sensitive topic, but I think it's one that we shouldn't be afraid to discuss because there are trade-offs.
Agreed. I think,
And transportation is definitely one.
yeah.
The amount we spend on transportation for such a small city is high.
And you know, the health things that go along with it, kids sitting on a bus for 45 minutes to get to school is ridiculous when they could be walking outside, getting fresh air and coming to school ready to learn. Yeah, I have a lot of feelings. about
Yeah,
that,
and I'd
but
love to, I'm excited to have those conversations. Now that we know who the next mayor is, you know, look,
we can start
we can
having
start,
conversations.
yeah.
Um,
Not the next mayor, the current mayor. That's right. Thank you.
And then finally, out of district placements into Salem,
Huh.
especially for the high school. Are we seeing that?
So you mean choice?
School choice.
Yeah, we have about 50 students that choice in every year. We opened it up a couple of years ago, 2 years ago, to the whole district. It's not just Salem High. We now have choice. We have 15 seats available at every grade level. And we have about 50 students total that choice in. And that, I think it amounts to about $500,000 every year that comes in school choice. We're actually about almost net the same, like the number of kids leaving for choice. Remember, choice is school choice, that's school choice out of Salem. And that's different than out of district placement. I know there's all these terms. And then school and kids coming in, it's about the same. It's about the same number.
Are you seeing any demand for more placements at the high school now that we've got this?
Well, it's
great
interesting.
program?
It's interesting you bring that up because Beverly has approached us about coming to having some of their students use the CTE programs at Salem High School in the what we call after dark. We used to send those kids to Essex. Essex used to have a program. So Beverly, who has no CTE programs, would send their kids there. I think they're interested in exploring a relationship with us because, yeah, I don't want to get into the politics of what that was, but they're interested in accessing some of the places we have openings. And I think our programs now sell themselves better than they ever have. So we had a team from Beverly over just last week looking at the programs, and they have about 20 or so students that are interested in coming for a part of their day to the CTE program. So that would be we would receive Chapter 74 dollars, which are vocational dollars from Beverly, if that ends up happening. So I'm not even sure I was supposed to talk about that all publicly, but here we are. I mean, it's too late about it, but that's the kind of we're having, and we're also talking to Peabody because Peabody has some CTE programs, but we offer things that they don't, and they offer things that we don't. So, for instance, like cosmetology is a very popular one. We don't offer cosmetology, but Peabody does. I mean, I love the idea that our kids could actually have choices to be able to go to programs, you know, in the area where they're, you know, if they're interested in it, and we have relationships with our partners. So that's an opportunity, you know, and I think more students are just, I have a lot of kids that tell me, I didn't even know that you had CTE programs at the high school. So some of that, as it's becoming more publicized, I think more, you know, students are, you know, choosing. I hope more students are choosing to come to Salem High because of it.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to quickly note that Counselor Watson Felt has exited the meeting remotely. Counselor Merkel.
Thank you, Chair McLean. I first want to start by thanking both of you, the school committee, and your educators, the staff, for the incredible work that you do. It's been extremely hard work, especially over the last few years. It does not go unnoticed, and it is greatly appreciated, and thank you. So I want to take that opportunity to say that. And thanks for all the great questions. Most of my questions have been answered. But also just to that point, your focus on mental health. I loved it when, you know, reading about the telehealth that was going to start several months ago. I love the focus on non-conventional learning, the New Liberty. I went to the graduation of the CTE students, and the enthusiasm that they had for, their instructors and their teachers. They were just cheering them on. I don't remember that kind of enthusiasm when I was in school. So it's real. I was not I was a non-conventional learner, and those programs is something like that would have been great for me. So really appreciate that. Also appreciate one of your priorities, building a diverse workforce. And you already partially answered that when you said you have added many multi-language teachers. So thank you for that. I was just wondering where you feel you are with that, if you think you feel you've gotten that to where you want it, or if it's been challenging, to diversify the workforce. And then I had one other question after
Sure.
that.
No, it's super challenging. And I think we're committed to, I think the best way, in my opinion, that you can do that now is by investing in your own people. So paraprofessionals to becoming teachers. The good news is there's a lot more flexibilities in certification than there's ever been before. And this is an opportunity to elevate people who are homegrown Salem folks who are working in our schools, who are really committed to our community. They work as paraprofessionals. We've been able to elevate some of them in the last year. And I do think that that's the place to look. And then I really believe our students we have an early education program at Salem High School as part of a pathway, and we haven't really formalized the return back to the Salem Public Schools to become teachers. And that's an area that I really want to focus on, because I think you've got a better chance of, everybody's trying to recruit a more diverse workforce, but where we stand the chance is to invest in the people that live in this community who are going to be here, right? And who send their kids to our schools, who are, have graduated from our schools. I think that's the place that's where I see how we can achieve success. I think one of the places we've struggled is we're not as diverse in the central administration, the school building leadership. And I do think that's a problem. We've struggled to get diverse candidates and, for us to recruit diverse candidates to assume school leadership positions. And so what I'm trying to do right now is we're investing in building the pipeline from within. So I've got two of our budding leaders of color in a program at BC for school leadership. So I'm trying to build the pipeline of future principals that are diverse. And when you have a more diverse leadership team, principals, central office staff, then I do think you start creating a culture. You can start hiring a more diverse workforce. Teachers will want to come work when there's a more diverse leadership across the system. So now we have a DEI role similar to the city. Unfortunately, that person is becoming a superintendent in another district, but Dr. Carmone is going to Somerville, which is great for Somerville, but is a loss for us. But we have that role. And so, we're working very closely with Rahina at the city. But that is a challenge, but it's critical. And I see the difference it makes with kids. I mean, it really, especially at the middle and high school level, it makes a huge difference when kids see educators who look like themselves and are from the community, community. Oh, that's right. Thank you. Thank you. We have an Inspire fellow program with Salem State for staff of color. And we had three staff members who signed contracts early to become teachers in the Salem Public Schools, and they will become teachers They will be teachers next year in our school system. So Salem State is working with us on also creating a pipeline. Most of those young people, though, are Salem school grads too. So back to the point that our own is who we have to invest in.
Thank you. That's terrific. And they were already so invested in our Salem communities. So that's really terrific information. Thank you. And also regarding your unhoused students, you had a number of, just 145 last March and then 208 this March. And one of the questions I have, but I think you quickly answered, was how many are from the unhoused folks up at Salem State, but I think you said it was about 50.
Yep.
Yes, and just for my own, to have a better understanding myself of the challenges and the scope of homelessness in Salem. Is that number of students, I assume that doesn't include their siblings and their family members? And do you find them more at the higher grades, or just if you have any, quick, I know it's anything involved,
I
like
mean-
this is a long conversation, but if you had anything else to offer about
So
that.
the number includes all children who are in the school. So some of them, that number may be siblings. There's a lot of families who are doubled up, living together. We have seen, um, there's a lot of families that bounce back and forth from Lynn, Peabody and Salem, sometimes from Lawrence. And so we do see quite a bit, it really ranges, all ages. It's hard to say that there's any one particular, um, group. I mean, I think that's where our City Connects coordinators are really helpful because they do support families with the wraparound services, food. They can help with housing. I think we do a pretty good job in supporting the families. Transportation is tricky for them. I would like to do more, work with some of the shelters in the area. In terms of like, I would love to, this is actually one of my goals for next year is to start a attendance coalition that includes hopefully a city councilor, but community organizations, shelter, police, fire, just because I think attendance is a community issue, community partners. And so, I don't have all that's the best I can give you on that. I think our schools do a really good job though. And it's one thing about Salem, that's why we were really not fazed by the students that came in large numbers, because our schools are just used to a lot of kids coming in and out, and their mindsets are right, not perfect, but generally very accepting and welcoming, and it speaks to the values of the city, and I think for the school, I've been impressed with how the schools have adapted these families, and the feedback. I met with some of the families at Salem State. I had a chance to go over and speak to the families, and their experience has been very positive. I mean, it's not easy, and they had some good input, but it was generally, I think they feel like the schools have received them very well, and I think that is something we do well as a system.
Thank you. I really, it's great to hear that they felt welcome, and thank you for all those efforts. And I also want to say thank you for providing transportation when, technically you did not have to with where
Well, I
was
appreciate the school.
geographically.
The school committee's been very supportive.
Yeah, so I really appreciate that they're getting transportation. Thank you for that.
Councilor Cohen.
Thank you, Chair McLean. Really proud of our public schools. I think they, in many ways, differentiate themselves from other districts. Before the meeting, we talked briefly about an educational program around substance opiates. Mary and I served on a task force together, and hopefully that's something that can be an investment at the school level. I wanted to say that I can't think of anything that's more exciting than the expansion of the CTE program. Having come from a trade industry, I'm blown away at the quality and the energy of the staff and the excitement that the students have. That we're going to have programs in clean energy and marine are really, again, will differentiate us. I attended the Revere Salem Unified Sports Track meet. You were there, obviously. And Mary and I sat at a couple of banquets. And I'm just going to say that I've never seen a level of sportsmanship like the athletes in the Unified Sports Program. And if the Bruins and the Celtics had the same commitment to each other, they'd still be playing. And now I'm going to get to something that troubles me. My opinion is there's no reason that our schools should be experiencing a utility increase burden the way they are. I'm going to give a couple of examples. When Jenna Ide was, with the city, there was a conversion at the Salerno, which was the most highly intensive
utility user in the city. And through installation of heat pumps, there's been a big difference. That concept should be, brought to other schools. I know there's a couple of schools that don't have air conditioning or one school, yeah, which could because they have 990 solar panels on the roof. And I do want to give an example. The school solar program on the Witchcraft Heights and the Bentley School, I came up with an idea, and Jeff Ely, who was, before your time, was the sustainability energy planner at the time, presented to our broker, Peregrine, who I don't think is a competent broker, and they said it was impossible. Okay, and even though the incentives don't exist today, and we did basically inherit a donation through the legal agreements that Footprint had, but we own $1.7 million of solar panels, and we own 100% of the electricity. So 1.7 million in equipment produces somewhere between $400,000 and $600,000 of electricity a year. That's a pretty outstanding return on investment. That's electricity that we don't pay for, that we're not concerned about, increased costs that may or may not be valid. In addition to that, we are in the process, we're several years into it, of receiving $100,000 a year approximately in revenue that's tax-free to the city. So over 10 years, $1 million. That money goes directly to the schools. So that's $1 million over 10 years that we're realizing. The solar projects on the Collins and the Saltonstall are really a poor model. It's a power purchase agreement. We get a discount. There's no reason that a city like Salem should be doing what every other city is doing and just getting a discount. There are creative opportunities that we could be realizing where we could appreciably not only diminish the increase in electric rates, which we have no control over, but we can have full control over that. So I'm just offering that I think that was very troubling to see that increase. I feel like some of the decisions that have made over the last couple of years were made and they look nice. I took pictures of the solar panels outside the Saltonstall, but I don't feel it benefits the city as much as it benefits the installer and the companies that installed them. Salem State, for example, has a little bit different model. I don't think it's as good as what I would propose, and I'm not saying that everything is possible, but it may be probable. So I do feel like energy costs are not only good because we can train students. The high school, for example, the roof, where we were going to put the solar panels, and Mary knows about this, when they redid the roof, they didn't make it solar ready. We could have put all the panels that are on Witchcraft Heights and Bentley School on the high school. That's how much real estate is there. So although I'm concerned, I do think that we have an opportunity, and this could play into the CTE program because, there is an opportunity for us to be leaders in clean energy. We have the wind terminal coming. And I know Crowley has committed to being involved in the CTE program, but we have lots of clean energy through heat pumps and solar and wind, where we can really be a place that kids can see an opportunity for, making a career where they never could in Salem better than anywhere else. So, I'm just going to end this by saying the work I've done in the past in the schools and currently doing, I think we have incredibly energetic and creative teachers and staff, and our students are really reflective of that. Some of them as the in the council came and spoke with the council about an initiative they had about, safety around the school. And that's very inspiring. And those kids wrote a petition and spoke at the council in ways that if I spent a year, I couldn't be as eloquent as they were and brave as they were to come and speak, some of them for the first time they ever spoke in public. So I just want to thank you and your staff for all the great work you're doing, and really appreciate the direction that the schools have had and are taking. I think of all the things in Salem, I'm really as proud of our school system as anything else.
Thank you, and we'll probably take you up on your offer to talk a little bit more about some of the energy savings work. Follow up, Elizabeth. So, thank you.
Councilor Brodzinski.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions and a couple of comments. I'll ask the questions first. They're kind of ground balls. We were talking about absenteeism earlier, and you were talking about how that bothers you, that it's at such a high rate. Is there a percentage attached to that of how many of what our absentee rate is? And has it risen historically? Has it been the same in this city that you know of, or is this something that's a trend?
So, the pandemic has blown a lot of that out for everybody. The numbers last year, almost a third of our kids were chronic across the district. The numbers have been, and this year so far, I have a dashboard that updates every day. We're closer to a quarter. So we've made significant improvement just in a year, but still a quarter's too high. And Salem High has historically had very poor chronic absenteeism in the high 30s, even pre-pandemic. I think some of it may be some coding and how data collection issues, but I think directionally it's still problematic. But I do think we have a new strong attendance lead director for the district. I think our schools have established strong attendance teams. Because listen, if you're not in school, you're not going to, I don't care how good of a student you are or how great the teaching is, it's not going to make a difference if you're not, you're not present, right? So I do, so the trends, I have to say, I came from a district that was in receivership. Salem's chronic absenteeism was worse than Holyoke's was, right? So I have to say that's one of the most shocking statistics I saw, but I think we're trending in the right direction. And I would love for this to be a community effort. Like I'd like this to be something we all wrap our arms around, getting kids to school and be present on time every day. So I'd love, that's something I hope to do. Again, during the pandemic, it was hard to really gauge what the real, kids were out. They needed to be out. We didn't want sick kids in school. But we've learned a lot. I've learned a lot this year. We're headed in the right direction. We got to double down on some of that work. We'll be reaching out to you to help support some of the effort.
I believe your idea with the home visit program, when Mary was talking earlier about, I guess, home outreach workers. I think that's a fantastic idea. I think that's a great way of trying to get to the root. Have you got any idea of how many outreach workers, how that's going to be run? How big are they going to be? Full-time? Is it going to be a staff?
Yeah, so we have outreach. We do have family engagement facilitators at every school. That's something the school committee has supported, prior to my time, and their work has been really important, both in terms of building relationships with families around attendance and getting to school. But the home visiting program, we're actually, Laura Saad, who many of you know, is chairing that work, leading that work for the district, and she's meeting with principals tomorrow. We're going to talk about sort of what they would like to see, how many teachers. It's voluntary, like you can't force people to do it, but we're going to offer the opportunity for teachers to get trained. You also have to train people. You can't just send people out into people's homes. There's got to be some training, but everywhere I've seen it done well, it does make a difference. And I'm sure, Ms. Manning, I'm sure had those initiatives, at her school over time. I think more recently, Bentley has been doing it. But historically, Salem has done it. I think it's time to bring that back. Since now we can't, people are opening their homes back up to welcoming folks in there. So I do think that it's all about relations. It's about engagement and relationships, right? And when that exists, people feel better about their schools. Remember, some of our parents had really bad experiences in school, whether that was here in Salem or somewhere else, right? And so we've got to make kids and families feel really good about their schools.
Thank you. Years ago, when Horace Mann was attached to Salem State University, the Salem State University, their teachers part of the program, provided student teacher practitioners, I guess you can call it. Do they still assist the school system in providing teaching at Horace Mann to offset the costs?
Yeah, so we do.
How big of a chunk is that?
We have interns. We have interns from Endicott and Salem State. At Horace Mann, we have the largest number. I think we have 5. Is that right? 5. And that model has existed for a while there with Salem State and having interns, student teachers, fellows. Yeah.
Thank you. I too was part of the graduation for the CTE with some of the other fellow counselors, and it was the atmosphere was very electric. Everybody was very much in tune to seeing that crystal ball just get bigger and brighter as it goes on. And I'm glad to hear that Crowley is going to be sponsoring the marine mechanic end of it. I think our port is one of our biggest, brightest parts of our future. And all the work that's involved into making the port successful will also be an employment opportunity. And having people that are educated in that field will help out quite a bit. So I'm excited to hear that. The last thing I just wanted to talk about was something that's maybe more for the mayor's office than for you, but it is part of you, and that's the new high school. Because there's all kinds of buzz about the new high school. It's funny because I graduated from the old high school. I watched the new high school being built, which was in the late 70s. Now it's about 45 years old and it's already falling apart. Well, actually, it was falling apart from the very beginning. When they built it, and I know some of you folks are going to remember this. Probably within the first year, they figured out that the roof was leaking horribly, and they had to rip off the roof and put on a new roof, which of course wasn't built right to take any solar energy panels. Shortly after the roof was went down the tubes, I guess the windows, all the windows that you used to be able to see out of, all of a sudden got all fogged up, and nobody could see out of the windows of the school. Imagine the price tag that it cost the city and the taxpayers to replace all the windows in the high school, an enormous cost. And there were structural failures. I mean, there were parts of the wings of the building were separating from parts of the school. This is a 45-year-old building that we spent a lot of money on. Well, to watch it just fall to pieces is a sin. It really is. What process are we going to use to not replicate that when we build our new place? How do we make sure that this doesn't happen again?
Well, I'll just start. Maybe the mayor wants to jump in. I mean, I do think there's been a number of advancements in school construction, hopefully since then. I think it's going to come down to selecting a strong project manager, a strong construction team, design team in the process. I think there's a lot of discussion that still needs to happen about what that is going to look like. I think people are automatically making the assumption it's going to be a new high school on that property. I really don't know. I think we have to have folks who know a whole lot more about school construction than I do. And, we do internally to help us think through about what the most cost effective, but also long lasting, because you want these buildings to last, more than, what Salem High lasted. So I think, where the mayor and I have been, we have to select a building committee over the next few weeks to submit to the state. We want to make sure we have the, a diverse group of citizens with different knowledge to help spearhead the process. And, so that we don't replicate that. But I think there is a lot of buzz about it. And I think we just got to pause until we're going to do a feasibility study. We're going to really look at the different options. I don't even know if you can build there's ledge up there. So I don't know what's all going to be possible at that site. It's an exciting opportunity, but I just want to, caution people not to just jump to, it's going to be, they've already made their decisions. We're far from it. There's a long road ahead in making, in a thoughtful decision, but it's an awesome opportunity that we certainly don't want to squander.
Don't want to repeat our mistakes. We want to learn from them, for sure.
And quickly just add to that, you said exactly what I was going to say as far as the condition of the standards for school buildings has changed a lot in the last 40 or 50 years. And I think the other component of the project is being very forward thinking in how we're considering this building. The high school project, it's not necessarily only because the condition of the building, but it's also the nature of the facility. So it's not designed for the CTE program that we all, I think, really appreciate and value, is in a space that poorly serves it. And many of the programs that are growing and that we want to support are in spaces that poorly serve them. It's a building that's not built for 21st century technology needs. It's a building that's not built for 21st century energy needs. And, as terrible as it makes me feel to say this as a parent of school-age children, it's not built for 21st century safety and security needs either. So I think we have an opportunity to not just build a better building from a building standpoint, but build a better school for our community and where we're going to be going in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you.
Councilor Hepworth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to take a minute to appreciate that Councilor Prosnowski referred to the high school as the new high school. And I also just want to thank you for what you've done for our school system here and your team. I think over the last 4 years, I've noticed a change just in the way people are talking about our schools. And I think there's a feeling, at least, and I know we have a long way to go, but there's a feeling that we're headed in the right direction, and that we have I think that we all share a lot of the values that you talked about on here. So appreciate that. Nationwide right now, the teacher morale, especially since the pandemic, seems to be low, and that's across the United States, but also even just locally, talking to friends of mine that live in different communities. The same issues we're dealing with here in Salem, they're dealing with in other places. We talked a little bit about some positions that will be eliminated, and I guess my question is just around, morale and also turnover. Do we track turnover? What metrics do you use to track that? What does that look like? Is that something that we talk about? I didn't see anything in the presentation about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's in part of my goals, and it's actually one of the metrics that we'll have in the new strategic plan is around retention of teachers. Look, I'm married to a teacher too, so I hear it, morning, day, night. This is a tough time to be a teacher, and I am worried about the profession. We all should be worried about the profession, especially since there's so many other choices of jobs where you don't have to work in person. And people want the flexibility. Young people want the flexibility, not just young people, all people want that. And schools don't offer that. You have to be in person. And when you're on, you are on. Gone are the days, I never want to hear somebody say, well, teachers have the summer off. When they're at work, they are full tilt the whole time. And there's nothing like it. I can close my door if even though I am in the 6th grade wing, I can close my door and do work, right? That's not true about the life of a teacher who's even on their breaks, they're still juggling a lot of different things. So, and I do think the work has gotten more complicated and harder. I mean, kids are coming back dysregulated. Parents, have to say, are a little more on edge in general too. And, that's made it a challenging time. I think we like many districts like ours, the turnover is real and the churn is real. I think the thing that we have to pay the most attention to, and I wrote my dissertation about this not that my dissertation isn't very good, but it was the principal's role in teacher retention. And I never, I guess so, but I never realized how valuable it would be when I just wanted to get that diploma. All I wanted was that piece of paper. But now I realize it was all about the principal's role in teacher retention. And I've come to believe that so much of the experience for teachers is the culture and climate that's built by the administration and leadership in the school. As much as my wife always says to me, you don't matter. Nobody cares about the superintendent. Like, you don't work for the superintendent. You're too far removed from it, but you do feel connected to the leader of your building. And they either create a culture and a climate where you want to be and you feel like you belong. And even though it may be really hard work, you're going to stick around because you got a culture there that's really strong and positive. Where that doesn't exist is where you see the churn. And I would say that's very true about Salem too. Part of the reason why I moved a lot of some principals around this year, and you saw some movement, is I felt really strongly that we needed to get the right match in who the leader was of the school, and you know, that culture and the vision and the direction is set by who the leader is, and so I think we have to support part of the sort of the domino effect is there's less people who want to be principals, right? And people are being thrown into school leadership roles who are not necessarily ready for those positions, right? And that makes it harder conditions for teachers to work. And so in a time where less people want to be educators, we've got to make sure that the culture and climate in the schools are stronger. So what I do pay to the metrics, I do pay a lot of attention to these. We give annual surveys to teachers. The panorama survey, we give it at the beginning and the end of the year. I can see it by school and by teacher and staff at each school. And it is very, very telling about when the staff is happy, that translates to the kids and we see better results for kids, right? And so I pay over my career, I've paid more and more attention to that information about what the health of the school is. And not surprisingly, you're going to see more turnover in schools where the survey results. There's one of the questions is how likely are you to recommend this school to a colleague or to a friend, right? That data point is really powerful and tells me a lot about what the conditions are in the school. So I don't know if that answers your question exactly, but you know, it's something we have to pay more attention to about like the well-being of the adults in the school. Has to be stronger. And not surprisingly, where, like I said, like interestingly, New Liberty has almost always the highest culture. And they have some of the most challenging students who have not had success in school. But what makes it such a successful school is the adults are all bonded together around the vision and mission of the school.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that I appreciate that about the taking care of the adults in the school, because I think that the experience of the kids is impacted hugely by the adults that are teaching them. And it's also disruptive. I mean, this turnover is disruptive to students and seen across all schools.
Absolutely.
And it's expensive, and it's disruptive and it's expensive across in any business, not just teachers in any workplace. It is something that's difficult to deal with. So I'm glad to know that you're tracking that. Would love to see that data maybe in future years in these budgets. I think it is something we should be looking at. Councilor Morcillo talked about neighborhood schools a little bit. I just wanted to add that is as a parent at pickup and drop off, that's a topic that has gained a lot of steam over the last year of just parents assuming that we're moving to a neighborhood school model and then wondering what that means for our school, specifically a school like, I'm a parent at Salt and Stalls. We feel like at some of these schools, you feel like you're sort of frozen in time a little bit until we figure out what we're moving on to. So I would encourage, I'm sure this is something we're looking at, but to sort of move toward, if that's the goal, then we move towards that goal and we communicate that to parents so we know what direction we're headed. I do think that would be something that would be appreciated. My question around that, though, is I assume that the concern is around diversity. Is it something that we have done a study on to know what, I don't know off the top of my head what that would do to the diversity in our individual schools and the mix there? Is that a study that we've talked about commissioning, or is that something that we can?
Yeah, we did a lot. The heat map that was developed, we can cut it different ways based on some of the data we collected as part of the master facilities plan. we have that data as a district. And so we haven't really gotten deeply into it yet. I mean, I think this is, I really do think this is a school committee conversation around the school choice. I do think, yeah, the worry is about, we have pretty integrated schools right now, which I'm really proud. I mean, Salem should be really proud of. I mean, the Salem Public Schools looks like the state of Massachusetts, and most of the schools, do fit that balance. We got two outliers. Carleton's a little bit of an outlier, and Bentley is an outlier as well. And so we're working on that. But I think generally that's something that you all should be proud of, that the schools do reflect, kids are being educated in what the world really looks like, which is something that is, I think, very special about Salem. So yes, I think that's something we have to pay attention to. The other thing about Salem that, I mean, you all know better than me, the schools are in like very odd places. Carleton and Bentley are right next to one another. They're not really like in a neighborhood per se. There's not a ton of homes, which is a little different. And maybe that's one of the reasons why choice existed in Salem. But so there's a lot that would have to be looked at. They're not exactly the most ideal locations for where the majority of our families live downtown. They live near Saltonstall. I mean, the number of kids that could go to Saltonstall, and want to be there because it's close to their home, exceeds what the capacity is there right now. I mean, we really almost would need another building that's close, because Miss Manning, I just had this conversation. To walk from that area to Bentley is not exactly an easy walk, right? Okay, all right. Right. There are some, yeah. Yeah. And the people who live here should be leading this discussion more than, but I think it's an important discussion for all of us to have, so.
And agreed. I think I hope we head in that direction, because I think that the transportation to school should be more than just buses and cars. My kids have tried to be biking and walking to school more this year, and I hope that at some point, we've seen this in the council chamber a little bit, kids advocating for safe ways to get to school. I think that's sometimes a big missing piece of the conversation, where we argue about pedestrians and cars when we got a lot of kids that just need to get to and from school. And if they could do that safely, that would be a huge relief on the traffic around Salem, because it's outrageous around some of the schools sometimes at pickup and drop off times. On that same track, we talked briefly about the school location, just to plug for whatever we pick for a high school location at some point in the future. I hope that we're working with either the state of Massachusetts or the city to ensure that we have ways for kids to get there that are safe, not on a bus, not in a car. I think that the location at the high school, there's been some progress over the years, but still, I would not let my kids ride down Highland Avenue to get to that school. And then just the last question, D1, is he how is he paid for? Is it a grant, and is it something I love the idea of the program. I think it's great. I hope we can continue that. I just wonder how that funding.
That was paid for a grant that we had, and then I think we've also matched some of the funds as well. I have a meeting with D, I think next week, to talk about what the future holds. In that it's really been a transformative experience. And honestly, like, this is an example when you have adults working with kids who kids are connected to. We just hired a dance instructor for Collins, who's a former Salem High student. He just started, I think, this week, to just add more, to create more engagement. Specialists are a tough time for kids when they are not interested in the specialists. But when it really is transformative when you watch people like musicians, folks that really understand that are part of popular culture, and what they can do for engagement levels with kids. D1 is an absolute celebrity in this school district. He will walk down the hallways and kids just flock to him. So I want to invite people to see him when he's in front of kids, because you saw some of it in the piece that was done. But I'm hoping to continue his work here because I'm actually more interested in him working with adults than kids, because I want him to teach adults to do what he does well, because that's what we need to figure out, is how do we get more adults to have those kinds of relationships with kids. He's great with kids, but I can only get him a couple times a year. But when he comes, I want him to be able to work with our staff, so that they can build stronger connections, with kids. I certainly, as my daughter says, nobody wants to talk to you, Dad. So don't talk to the kids in the hallway. She always says it to me. No middle schooler wants to talk to you, Dad.
I will say that
I don't have it, I guess, but I don't.
I think my son may have been confused as to who you were, but when I said Dr. Zreich, he thought you were Dr. Dre. the other day. He was
Well,
like,
I mean,
"Is-
I'll
is
take
he-"
that, whatever helps. I mean,
And my and all right. And same thing with D1. I think it was even the kids at Salt and Salt. I don't know how much experience he's had there, but even the kids at Salt and Salt all know who he is. So I think the idea of having an artist in residence, I think, is a great thing for our public schools. But thank you.
thank you.
Okay, a really robust round of questioning. Does anybody want to go for two? Doesn't seem like it. We're going to get to the vote and get everybody home, but I really want to thank you for being here. You can tell that you're dealing with a room full of parents here, in addition to a bunch of counselors. And something that I heard a lot, just to sort of wrap this up, something that I heard a lot over the last, pick a number of 5 to 10 years about Salem, is everybody was having a public conversation about the state of our schools. A lot of times I would hear advocates for the school say, Salem public schools have a reputation problem, right? Things are better than they seem. We have a reputation problem. We just need to let people know what is the good things that are going on. And, I think that's true to a degree, but I always thought that was a little bit of an undersell. I think leadership really makes a difference. Vision really makes a difference. Trust really makes a difference. And I think, as you were saying, culture really makes a difference. And speaking for myself, I have noticed a clear cultural shift under your leadership since you got here. I think people see a sense of direction. I think people see a sense of where we're trying to go. I think people see a pathway. I think your accessibility and your leadership is a big part of that. So I'm really grateful to have you here, and I'm really grateful to be able to have this conversation and see your engagement, see your passion, see your preparation. I could tell that you have command of this information, and I just think that is so important for our school system. So I'm really grateful for you being here.
Thank you. Appreciate that. It's a humbling job, so I appreciate you saying that. Nothing that I've learned in the 20 plus years before this has prepared me for this moment in time. But I just, we just gotta. The only thing I just respond to that is we all just need to listen to kids more. We need to listen to what our students tell us, because that's where I learned the most about how to improve our schools. And so I would just urge all of us as adults in this community to talk to kids, because that's where the real answers lie about how to continue to improve their experience. And to this moment in time, none of us ever went through what kids are going through right now and what they see every day, what they experience. So we just have to continue to push ourselves to listen to what they have to say. It's their time, it's their education, not ours right now. So that's I appreciate you saying that. But I just would ask all of us as leaders to listen to voices of kids.
Excellent advice. Counselor Stott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I also wanted to make a comment because I kind of jumped right into my questions. So I wanted to also say my thank yous for to the public school and to you, Dr. Reich. Today was actually my daughter's transition meeting at Carleton School. So her 5th grade transition meeting, which I don't know if you're familiar with this at Carleton School, but each time they go up to the next level, in this case, Stella will be going to Collins next year, they do a presentation to their teachers, their support staff, and their parents of why they're ready to move forward and what they've learned and I'm going to cry. So after the meeting, I was like, and I'm budget tonight. I'm just throw all the money because it was amazing. And I just want to say thank you. And I totally agree. These kids have gone through a different experience than I think what we are all used to when we think of school. So thank you for figuring it out. It's a complicated, tricky topic. So thank you. Motion then. And on that, I would like to make a motion to approve the budget request for public schools of $71,154,142.
Great. Counselor Stott moves to approve the budget request for the Salem Public Schools in the amount of $71,154,142, seconded by Counselor Hapworth. All those in favor? 3 hands plus my own. It is approved. We'll take another motion. Motion to adjourn by Counselor Merkel. All those in favor? 3 plus my own. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.